Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the session of our Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee. With us today during our committee session is our colleague, Councilmember Lukey. Her bill is up in a little bit. And we have two items today, but before we dig into both of those, I did want us to just take a moment to hold in our thoughts the victims of the plane crash last night. And in addition to that, we sent 2 rescue squads to help during the evening. And so if we could just take a moment. Thank you, everyone, for that. This morning, we will begin our session with an overview of the County Executive's recommended FY26 capital budget and amended FY25 to 30 capital improvements program and other CIP assumptions. I will turn it over to Ms. Lachenko and Mr. Mia to go through everything.
Good morning. As you mentioned, we're going to have an overview this morning that I would characterize as basically a macro overview. Obviously, the committees still have a lot of work to do to go through the individual projects and identify any issues or opportunities there. So we are focusing on the big picture today. We also have OMB staff and finance staff here. If we need to dig deeper into a particular issue, they're here to help us with that. So with that, we have a presentation that we can bring up. So we are focusing big picture expenditure issues and revenue assumptions. First, just very big picture. And this is all based on the executive's transmittal from January 15th of the recommended amended FY25 through 30 CIP and how it compares to the original approved FY25 through 30 CIP. And just as another note, WSSC Water is not part of this discussion because their revenue sources are not part of the county government's revenue sources. Obviously, a lot of the folks in the county pay for WSSC Water, so we have the impact on the property taxpayer generally. But for purposes of today, the numbers don't include WSSC Water. So this chart shows what would be approved by agency under the executive's amended CIP and how it compares to the approved. For the most part, it looks fairly marginal. The one area that might strike you is MCPS, which shows what would be a significant decline. But as we've talked about in recent weeks, the executive made a lot of technical adjustments. A lot of dollars were spent early in FY24. That had been shown in the CIP in 25 and 26. So there was a significant amount of technical adjustment that moved dollars out of the CIP. And it also moved some state aid as well. So you'll see in some of the state aid comparisons as well, some of that also went down. But it's not having that kind of impact programmatically. It's more just balancing the numbers based on what's actually happening. And if you look elsewhere, county government has a marginal increase. A couple of the agencies are basically the same. So for the most part, we're looking at a more marginal executive recommendation at this point on the expenditure side. And then looking a little deeper in the county government portion of that, which obviously transportation makes up the biggest share of that. You can see there is a slight decline in transportation expenditures. There is one project, the Summit Avenue Extended project, which is deferred beyond 6 years. So that was one area of fiscal concern the executive had and where he made some deferrals for fiscal reasons. But once again, looking elsewhere, other than in general government, where you have a lot of different projects and we've had some cost increases in those areas, once again, you're not seeing giant numbers that are blowing up the approved CIP. We're seeing what we would expect or want to see in an off year where we're adjusting projects that need adjusting, adding where we need to add based on timeliness issues or outside funding, things like that, to try to minimize changes that can wait until a full CIP year next year. This is the revenue side. I apologize for the volume of lines here, but this shows on one page all of the revenue sources and the trends from the approved to the amended across all the funding sources in the CIP. And the biggest ones, as you can see, general obligation bonds, intergovernmental revenues. You can see those shares, and they're maintaining their large shares in the amended CIP, of course. And then you have a lot of other significant revenue sources. I'll note in particular with PAYGO, and there's been some discussion about this. The executive reduced the PAYGO assumption in FY25, still staying within the 10% policy level for PAYGO, but moved some of that out, which provides some additional funding that's available for the operating budget. So that's why you see a reduction in PAYGO. Intergovernmental revenues, there's a lot of puts and takes there across projects that the committees can look at. Impact taxes and recordation taxes, that's another area where we've gotten updates from the Department of Finance and OMB. Recordation taxes are up a little bit, but impact taxes are down more. So between those two funding sources, we are seeing a reduction. I think it's about $13 million over the 6-year period across those. And there's also another issue with regard to impact taxes we'll talk about later with regard to a bill that the council is currently considering. So once again, we're seeing what looks like a decrease in revenues. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of that are technical adjustments on the expenditure side that are also moving some of the revenues out of the CIP. So now you want to take this?
Okay, next I'll talk about some of the specific revenue sources. The next few slides you've seen last week as part of the CIP SAG discussion, but we've included them here again just as part of the macro overview. So the recommended CIP is assuming a GEO bond programming consistent with the previously approved CIP SAG that the council approved. It's $1.68 billion over 6 years, or $280 million per year, and that's been the level for the last 3 to 4 CIP cycles. Next slide. In terms of capital set-asides, again, you've seen this last week, but the CE is recommending an increase in the capital set-aside for GEO bonds over the 6 years, bumping up from $150.5 million in the previously approved CIP to $168, and most of that is in FY26, which has been set-aside has been increased to reserve capacity for Woodward High School once we have more clarity on the state aid funding for that piece. Next slide. PAYGO assumptions, again, from last week, you'll see a decrease in FY25 from $51.2 million to $28 million. The CE is recommending at or slightly above the policy level for all 6 years, but the main change is in FY25. Next, recordation taxes. The recordation tax for the school increment, which is used exclusively for school CIP projects, is increased over the 6 years from $375 million to $407 million. And the recordation tax premium, the numbers you see are 50-50 between county CIP projects and school CIP projects. That too has been increased from $308 million to $333 million. Recordation taxes are driven by several factors: the rate itself, which was increased 2 years ago, the volume and value of home sales is also another determinant factor. So as the market for homes in the county has been fairly active and high in terms of sales, the revenues are projected to increase over the next 6 years. Next slide. Impact taxes. Both Transportation Schools impact tax is down from the previously approved CIP. What the CE is recommending in his forecast here does not reflect the upcoming bill 22, is it?
Bill,
I forget the numbers.
2422 or
2424. Yes. So as the council has not approved that yet, that's not reflected in the forecast. But you'll see in the current forecast, the impact taxes are down for both. Again, that's largely due to development activity in the county. And this, of course, is a very volatile revenue to forecast, as our friends from finance can attest to. So it is a bit of a crystal ball happening here, but this is, again, to reflect the decrease in development activity in the county. And then in terms of current revenue, the 6-year current revenue, it's primarily down FY26, and that's specifically, we believe, due to current revenue in the Mass Transit Fund being programmed. We'll get more into detail at the T&E committee when they do their CIP project reviews, but the main decrease appears to be in the Mass Transit Fund in FY26.
Yeah, one thing I did want to catch up on, we skipped over it in this slide. In the general obligation bond section, the executive was able to secure GEO bond premium, which is when bonds sell for higher than the face value, and the county got about $31 million out of that, and so the executive was able to use that to help balance the early years of the CIP in particular. But that number is, and I've noted it in a note on the bottom of this chart, but with that down, you'd see the bonds would have gone down a little bit more for those technical reasons I mentioned earlier, but the bond premium pushes that up a little bit. School construction funding, this is, it's become more and more complex over the years. We have the traditional funding, which is approved each year by the state. There's a statewide allocation that the governor makes, and then the Interagency Commission on School Construction does preliminary allocations and then final allocations after the conclusion of the legislative session. And then we have to budget that and make it work within a 6-year period, so it does get complicated. In addition, we've had the special Built to Learn program that has helped us secure dedicated funding for Montgomery County, which is unlike the traditional funding where we don't necessarily know what we're going to get every year. With Built to Learn, there was an allocation up front to the large counties, and then the counties can apply over time for that. Unfortunately, that program is winding down in the 6-year period, so we will not have the benefit of that going forward. We talked about this last year during the full CIP. So the state aid is shown as lower in the amended CIP. Once again, there's some technical adjustments there. We also have the Woodward High School issue that Naeem mentioned briefly earlier that we have to resolve. And we will ultimately have to reconcile the CIP with what the state does on this issue and many other issues by sine die. So more to come on that. Now, overall, in past years, we've tried to present the GO committee what we would call a gap chart, where things stand. And in some years, it's been quite a significant gap to start with. In some years, the executive has recommended a different spending affordability guidelines higher than what the council's approved. So that creates a gap unless the council were to go along with that change. You could also have other adjustments. The executive has typically done affordability reconciliation projects for the college, Montgomery Parks, and MCPS. This year, while there is an affordability project for MCPS, it's much smaller, and it's related to the state aid issue for Woodward for the most part. And as was mentioned earlier, the set-aside has some allocation for that. So at the moment, we're not seeing an impact from the affordability projects either. So with CIP SAG not presenting a gap and with the affordability projects not presenting a gap, what do we have in terms of issues going forward today? And what's presented on this chart are two things. One, we do have Bill 2224, and we got a revised fiscal impact statement from OMB. This is not noted in the packet. We discussed this issue yesterday at the staff level. But what I wanted to show here were the revised revenue estimates for the school impact tax and the transportation impact tax based on that fiscal impact statement that came over. And the bill would allow developers to pay the impact tax later in its construction cycle, and the intent there, as has been discussed here, is to incentivize more construction to move forward. That does have an impact based on the fiscal impact statement in the early years of the CIP. Overall, the idea is you would ultimately collect the same amount, but it does affect the individual years. So we have that issue early on. And then the other item we've noted here are a couple of projects in the CIP. I mentioned Summit Avenue Extended, and we also have the Outdoor Firearms Training Center, which are projects that had funding in the 6-year period in the approved CIP, but the executive, for fiscal reasons, has moved all of the dollars for these projects out of the CIP. So if the council were to start from square one and say we're not assuming any fiscal cuts at this point, then the gap you see here, that 37 million, would have to be found in the 6 years compared to what the executive has sent over. So the intent of our CIP review, of course, is for the council's priorities to ultimately be voted on at the end of this cycle, and not to necessarily accept up front the executive's recommendations, especially on fiscal issues, until the council's had its review and decided whether to concur or not. So, and similarly with the bill and the fiscal impact of the bill, the council is taking that bill up Tuesday, I believe, and then there can also be further discussions about what is appropriate in terms of fiscal impact to assume going forward in the CIP. As was mentioned, the impact taxes are very, very hard to predict. So we're talking about an estimate on top of a very uncertain estimate. So we don't want to set ourselves up. We don't want to set ourselves up, but we don't want to presume that there's more precision here than there really is as well.
Just to note one more thing on new projects, there aren't a lot of new projects that the CE is recommending that's have GO bonds or current revenue in them to help with the gap. On page 5 of the packet, there's really 2 projects that are new that have GO bond funding, the Brookfield Depot HVAC project and Gregg Road Bridge project. Most of the other new projects are leveraging outside sources funding, so they are restricted sources exclusive to that project, and so our ability to defer new projects perhaps is very limited this year.
Right. So what are some of the issues, the macro issues that may come back or likely to come back as part of our reconciliation? Well, PAYGO. Every year the council can decide how much PAYGO to assume. Staff likes to make sure we start out at the policy level at least, which the executive has, but the council could choose to restore some of the 25 PAYGO or utilize that 25 PAYGO savings in 26, for instance, to offset perhaps the fiscal impact of the school impacts and transportation impact tax bill. So PAYGO is an open discussion the council can have. Of course, whatever you allocate to the CIP is then not available on the operating side. We also do have the GO bond set aside, which is used to reserve space. We mentioned earlier there's some space reserved for Woodward High School, but that's another area we look at and the council will build as part of its reconciliation at the end of the process. We want to make sure the set-asides are healthy, but there often can be some marginal adjustments there to help within certain fiscal years. As we mentioned, the fiscal impact assumptions for Bill 2224, what ultimately the council decides to do with the bill, and if it passes, what to do about the potential fiscal impact. That's another discussion we can have. And then, of course, the impact of all of the reviews of the committee and ultimately the council with all the amended projects that have come over or additional projects that may come over as things move forward. For instance, with Bill 2224, if that does pass, we may well see amended projects from the executive, perhaps in conjunction with the operating budget, to balance the CIP based on his assumptions about the fiscal impact. And that'll be other additional projects that the council will then look at. And then, of course, with sine die, there will be often amendments to the CIP there to address whatever issues have come up at the state that we have to address now. So those projects will also be coming back to the council. So there's a lot of micro work that has to be done to build things up. So today we're looking sort of more top-down, but recognizing that we've still got a lot of work to do. I will say that at least right now at the starting point, based on past gaps where we've had $150, $200 million gaps in the CIP in some cases, this year we're looking at more marginal gaps. So hopefully the CIP can be more respectful of the approved CIP this time around, and the council can make the numbers work this year without having to revisit fundamental assumptions in the approved CIP. That's staff's goal going forward, is to try to focus on protecting those approved projects that were high priorities last year, and while still balancing across each year with all the funding sources. So that's all we have prepared for presentation. We're happy to answer questions, and we also, as mentioned, have executive staff here as well.
Great, thank you. So I just want to kick us off and say thank you to the executive staff, to our staff for this overview. I think it is, there's, as you said, there's still a lot of the details that we'll need to go through, but the fact that we are starting off in this place, which as Chair of Government Operations and Fiscal Policy, compared to prior years, I think is a really good place that we are starting off in being within our fiscal policies and looking at the gap we're looking at. Doesn't mean we don't have tough decisions that we will have to make as we move forward in collaboration with the County Exec's Office, but I think Mr. Lachenko, Mr. Mia, as you said, we're starting off in a good place, because I think we're starting off in a place of being solid in our fiscal policies, which is always, I think, really important. I won't go into much here, because I think many of the points I raised I did when we did the spending affordability guidelines last week. I will say and reiterate that I hope in some way that we can, when we dig deeper into this, look at potentially putting Summit Ave back in the out years as things progress. We had a lot of conversation on that last year during our full CIP review. The town of Kensington has done a great deal of work, and so hopefully we can work with them, Department of Transportation, and OMB, and figure out, is it possible to get some of that back in, even if we push it out from what it was last year. But with that, I'll see if my colleagues have anything to add.
Only thank you, and I do appreciate the president and chair of this committee, which he said. I do believe that Summit Avenue in Kensington, I always like to make that clear that it's not the one in Gaithersburg, but that Summit Avenue in Kensington is something that hopefully someday we can get back on track, as the outdoor firearms. I made the point that I believe when they first started talking about that, we were actually using muskets, because it's been that long that we've been putting this money, and it always gets pushed out. And I understand why it gets pushed out. I think at this moment, we need it to be pushed out, but it would be right to get it in eventually. And with that, I do thank you for all your hard work.
Great. Councilmember Friedson.
Well, thank you. We'll ditto everything that has been said. First of all, I do think we're in better shape than we have been, so that is a positive. We do have some work to do. I'll make a note of PAYGO. I do think we ought to look at PAYGO. I know that there is an impact on the operating budget, but if we want to address some of the capital budget needs in the most fiscally responsible way with some uncertainty as we move forward, PAYGO is a good way to do that, because we're not obligating ourselves to ongoing spending. It's one-time use of funds, and it allows us to have some flexibility. Of course, that doesn't solve structural dynamics of out years in the capital budget, but it certainly will help us to address some of the needs that we have. And as we look at Summit Avenue, which I have been a big supporter of, that used to be in District 1, and I championed that project and really appreciate the council president, who's now the district council member representing that area, for carrying the baton on that, and look forward to continue to partner with her and the town of Kensington and others to move that forward, and hopefully we can figure out a way to do that. But ultimately, I do think that PAYGO is an area that we can really look at, because I do think that it is the most fiscally responsible way for us to address some of the uncertainty that we have, and do it in a way that actually moves us forward with some key priorities that we all share. But appreciate the work of council staff, appreciate the work of the executive branch. This is not an easy endeavor to put all the pieces together of the capital budget, and I know that they are continuing to work hard as we prepare to get the operating budget, which is coming here soon. But I appreciate that, and appreciate the chair and council president for her efforts and her work here.
Did have one other item just wanted to mention, and we talked about how the amended CIP is looking more of a marginal review this year. Part of the reason for that is that the college, parks, and MCPS proposals were not overly ambitious either. So that left a little bit less work for the executive to do to find a way to balance all of that. So I did want to, provide a shout out to the agencies that, especially with regard to MCPS in particular, that their request did not create a $100 million problem starting out, that they were able to find a way to meet their incremental needs basically within their existing resources. Of course, we still have that state aid issue to deal with, but what the requests we saw from those large agencies that are big drivers of the CIP put us in a good position, or put the executive in a good position, and that's putting us in a good position.
Yes, I want to thank MCPS left it for their operating. So I'm glad that the CIP came in where they did. And as, sorry, I couldn't help it.
I can't speak to the operating.
And I want to say a shout out again to our Parks Department and Montgomery College. Montgomery College has year in and year out always been a terrific partner as we looked at CIP and operating budget to come to the table and help us figure out things. So, all right, we are done with this. This was just an overview briefing, so no decisions to be made. We will make more decisions in the future. Our second item and final item for today is Bill 25-24, Contracts and Procurement, Prohibition Against Human Trafficking Enforcement. We have our director from our Office of Procurement here with us today, and we also have Ms. Wellens and Mr. Ogorzek. Or is Gorzlek? Okay. Ogorzlek. All right. I'm going to practice it. I promise you.
You like Johnny O?
I know. That's true, actually.
That works great.
Gorzlek.
Both my parents were both teachers, and so middle schoolers were strong.
Good. Yes. I appreciate that. Since we have the lead sponsor of this bill, I'll turn to her to see if she has any opening comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say a great hearty thank you to Director Shetty, to Jim O, and to the County Attorney's Office for the collaborative effort on refining the bill. You'll notice in the packet there are a couple of amendments that we have in here that are really designed to fine-tune and get us the precision we need, want, and should have. And aside from that, I think everything else is pretty straightforward. So with that,
great. I'll turn it over to our team to walk through and discuss any of the decision points we have on committee today.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I will be pretty quickly turning it over to Mr. Gorzalek. But just to give you a quick synopsis. So, as the committee knows, the bill 25-24 as originally introduced, it's making amendments to Chapter 11B, the Contract and Procurements chapter of our county code. And the bill would require each bid or proposal submitted to the county to certify that the bidder or offerer hasn't been found to have violated a federal or state law against human trafficking. Then the subsequent contract would build in certain provisions, of course, indicating that the contractor must comply with all federal and state laws against human trafficking, and setting up some notice procedures if there's a charge or claim against the contractor, or if there's a finding of liability or an actual, conviction of a contractor related to human trafficking, that they would have to immediately notify the Office of the Procurement, and, obviously depending upon whether there's a final adjudication, the director would then be responsible for taking appropriate enforcement action. It also builds in a notification requirement to the council. So each time that general awareness, so that each time the director is notified, he would also share that information. As the lead sponsor noted, there are a few potential amendments for your consideration, which Mr. Gorzalek worked on closely with Councilmember Lukey and her staff, as well as the Office of the County Attorney. The first two are The first two items, bringing your attention to page 3 of the staff report, the first two items are potential amendments brought by the bill sponsor, and then the final item is just a clarifying amendment. And let me turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Gorzelek.
Good morning, council members. So I'll just briefly summarize what the three proposed amendments are. The first relates to the scope of the bill. It kind of concludes two separate pieces, one of which is clarifying, the second of which is expansive. So the first work that the First Amendment would do is to delete lines 5 and 6 of the proposed bill, which would delete the definition of contract that was set forth in the bill. Contract is otherwise defined in Chapter 11B in a way that is perfectly suitable for the purposes of this section, and this clarifies and removes any confusion that an alternative definition might have created. And then separately, as it was introduced, the bill applied to contracts that arose from an invitation for bids or a request for proposals. This amendment would also expand the application of this bill to include other contracts that meet the contract value threshold presently set by regulation at $100,000 for invitation for bids and request for proposals. Those could be all sorts of non-competitive contracts, for example, a sole source justification contract, or potentially a bridge wherein the county has entered a contract that a separate public entity had solicited. The second potential amendment, also from the lead sponsor, would amend the responsibilities of the Office of Procurement in terms of the enforcement mechanisms. Basically, what it would do is, as introduced, the bill would have required the Office of Procurement to engage in some enforcement mechanisms, even in the case of just an allegation or a charge against the contractor. This would excise that requirement, which both relieves the administrative burden on the Office of Procurement in the event there are just a lot of charges and allegations, and separately would also protect the county's liability interests in the event of a wrongful action taken for a charge or allegation that was quickly dismissed or adjudicated in favor of the contractor. And the third potential amendment, which was brought by the Office of the County Attorney, but with which the lead counsel as well as central staff concur, would clarify in the section related to debarment or suspension that the violation of subtitle 4 of the state labor and employment law article, that the action for the cause for debarment and suspension would arise when there's a finding by an administrative or judicial body, serves a similar purpose as the second proposed amendment to relieve the administrative burden on the Office of Procurement in terms of investigative functions, as well as to protect the county's interest in the event of a wrongful termination.
Great. All right, let's take up each of the amendment at a time to see if our colleagues have any questions, or Director Shetty, if you have anything to add as we go through the amendments, please let us know. So the first amendment on the scope of the bill, any questions or anything? Not seeing any, so the committee accepts that amendment. The next is on responsibilities of the Office of Procurement. Not seeing any comments or anything, and I think Mr. Shetty, you like that one?
Needs something to do.
Yeah, right.
I'm concerned.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here, but I will say that the reason I have less to do now is because all the work was done ahead of time, and that's why this works so nicely.
I just want to point out, Director Shetty and I did not coordinate our outfits today, but we are in fact coordinating.
Great. All right, on the second proposed amendment, not seeing any questions or anything, so the committee will accept that. And then the third is the clarifying language. Again, not seeing any questions or anything, the committee will accept that. Any other items or comments on this? Good, Councilmember.
Just thank you to Councilmember Lukey. You know, we've had no-brainer legislation before, but none as much of a no-brainer as this one. This is absolutely the right thing to do. So I thank all involved.
We prefer not to be no-brainer legislators, but this is no-brainer legislation. Really appreciate the work of the sponsor and look forward to supporting this.
Without objection, the Government Operation and Fiscal Policy Committee recommends this to full council for adoption. All right. Thank you, everyone, for all the work on this. That is our final item for Government Operations Fiscal Policy Committee session this morning. We are adjourned. Thank you all.